Hey, welcome back to the Disney Plus Everyday Challenge, and today we have X-Men: Days of Future Past. This is a 20th Century Fox film, brought in from the Marvel, not the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but Marvel Universe. Uh, this is back when Fox was its own thing, separate from Disney. It has since been acquired, and we keep getting teased a little bit here and there that the X-Men are coming. The X-Men are going to be joining the Marvel Cinematic Universe at some point, but right now, for now, this 2014 film, only, God, it's 2014. It's 8 years. It's 8 years old. Ugh, I can't believe it's 8 years old. But we've had a lot. We've had a number of X-Men films since then. We've had Apocalypse and Dark Phoenix and New Mutants and Logan and all sorts of things like that in that time. We barely got some of those, and to some varying levels of quality. But to me, I mean, this is the title of this comes from one of the all-time classic X-Men stories, Days of Future Past, which sends where Kate Pride, now older, some gray in her hair, the world is falling apart, and she has the ability to send someone back in time to warn the mutants that, hey, there's this guy that's going to start building sentinels and he's going to start trying to destroy us, and you got to prevent that because it's going to destroy the world. It's going to wipe out our people. Not only that, but it's going to destroy the world. And well, in that, she sent back the daughter of Jean Grey and Scott Summers, Rachel Summers, and of course that's not a character that exists so far in the movies that it came out. So I mean, honestly, if you're going to connect the two worlds, the two eras of these X-Men films, which consisted of the first three films, X-Men, just X-Men, X2 and X-Men X3, The Last Stand, you're gonna, which again, two Bryan Singers, one Brett Ratner film, uh, and you want to connect them to the sort of prequel, not sort of, definitely prequel films, although there's a lot of difficult connecting between the two, difficulty, connecting some of the storyline threads. It's difficult. Starring James McAvoy as Charles Xavier, to Patrick Stewart and Michael Fassbender, to Ian McKellen's Magneto. Well, who are you gonna have that's going to be able to handle going through? Who's been around long enough, let's say, to handle existing in two different eras? Well, of course, it's going to be Wolverine, starring Hugh Jackman. So, yeah, Wolverine, Logan, the biggest star, arguably, out of all of these films, and the most popular character, the most popular X-Man in existence in history, even before these movies were made. People were kind of like, oh man, when they do an X-Men film, they should do a Wolverine. Wolverine needs to be in that. Well, yeah, of course he was. And they picked a nobody, technically, named Hugh Jackman. And another guy turned it down. But yeah, it made him a superstar. And freaking A. That propelled the X-Men's films to some high stakes, high level, big superhero fandom that existed before the MCU was ever in play. Now, the MCU did come into play with Iron Man and everything else by the time these films were made. These kind of not a reboot, but again, like the prequels with X-Men First Class, X-Men Days of Future Past, Apocalypse, and Dark Phoenix. Yeah. At some point, I mean, you got to understand, there's so many superhero films. You know this, between the proper Marvel, then the extended Marvel over at Fox, and Sony with Spider-Man, and then everything else. It's kind of wonderful that now Marvel has it all, Disney has it all under one roof. Um, this film, of course, like I told you, it takes place in two different times in the far future of 2023, apparently. Yeah, 2023, where the Sentinels had taken over and destroyed everything, and the X-Men are making pretty much another last stand before sending Wolverine back into his mind into his old body in 1973 to warn everybody of what's to come. Pretty much the same premise as the comic book. If you haven't not read the comic book, you might not know most of the characters, but it is a good place. It is a pretty great story, and it won't look and pretty much won't look anything like what this movie looks like. But they had to go with their strengths in this movie. And Bryan Singer came back to do all these films. He came back to do this one. I think Matt, why can't I say his name? The guy did Kick Ass. He did the First Class one, but Bryan Singer came back for this one because, well, Bryan Singer is pretty much no matter what you think of him, which most people don't think too wonderfully of him right now because of certain things. Check the news. You can't deny he's an X-Men fan. Honestly, if you like the old films with Jean Grey and Cyclops and everybody else, this is kind of a neat little throwback because there's tons of references to the old films, and this is, in a very real sense, the first multiverse of madness. It actually has a very strong connection to Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, directed by Sam Raimi, because there is a line in Multiverse of Madness that Professor Xavier, spoiler, says in there when talking to Doctor Strange that is driven home in this film, Days of Future Past. So that is very much a core line in this film. So how it changes things here, it also changes things in the Multiverse of Madness film. And of course, this also is kind of I don't know, it has a spiritual connection to the Multiverse of Madness because this is kind of a multiverse story with alternate versions of the same characters, but in time. And at one point, Professor Xavier meets himself. Spoiler. Again, it's the kind of thing, if you didn't know that already, odds are you weren't really hungering to see these films in the first place. And one of the great things about the Multiverse of Madness and Loki and all these other things, Spider-Man No Way Home especially, with all the different Spider-Mans, these kind of things lend legitimacy to these older films that were made by different studios with different actors, that they don't discount them as unneeded. Like, oh, we have a new actor who plays that character, then those films don't count. You know what? They still count, and it's for people who care about that kind of thing. They're not core canon, but they are canon still. These stories happen and they're validated, and God knows there's going to be some point in this whole clash of the Kang Dynasty coming up in an Avengers film, amongst everything else that's happening in the multiverse saga through phases 4, 5, and 6. There's going to be strong references to this stuff once the X-Men join the whole hullabaloo. Even if it's just the last minute. Even if they have to drag Hugh Jackman kicking and screaming back to the role that made him famous and he swore he'd never do again. Well, Patrick Stewart said the same thing. But in this case, he was a different Patrick Stewart. He was a different Charles Xavier. So there's so much up in the air when it comes to the X-Men at this point. As I'm saying this right now, we don't know what's to come with the X-Men. Who will play certain characters? Which characters will even show up in the X-Men, and how they'll be presented, what their origins will be like. In this case, though, we get to see two different eras of X-Men working together, sort of, to save the world. This is as high a stakes an event that can possibly be imagined, even more so than the first X-Men film, which dealt with Magneto trying to make everybody a mutant, which is kind of a tired trope of turning the bad guys into the same thing you are in order to dissuade them from hate. It's been done a number of times throughout a number of different films. This very much is about making choices that will determine our future, and that's also a long-standing time travel trope, but it's no less powerful in this because people that we care about. People that are villains are very much right in many cases, and very much speaking about. I mean, they're not lying. They're not. They're manipulative at times. They're telling the truth, and they're saying things that are not villainous. They're just seeing things a different way in order to create a specific outcome to save the most lives. Where some people do not want to kill, Magneto very often has no compunctions against such things. And there's times where you're seeing our hero, Charles Xavier, is separated from who he is. He's given up his powers and everything else because he's in a deep depression and he does not want to get back into that whole world. He's lost everything after the last film. So it's kind of a big deal. And you see Magneto going, "What happened to you? I'm out there trying to save lives. I'm trying to help our people. And what are you doing? He's sitting around here drunk." You know, I think there's so many different facets in this film, which is kind of great. It's all kind of thrown together, and there's a lot to unpack in this, which I really enjoy. So yeah, it's. I know I've hardly talked about the movie itself, but we got, of course, like I said, James McAvoy and Patrick Stewart as Professor Xavier, Michael Fassbender and Ian McKellen as Magneto, working in two different eras. By the way, just in case you were wondering, this is not the Rogue cut of this film. There is another version of this film that's available on Blu-ray, and it is not available on Disney Plus. This is the original theatrical version that was released in 2014. They eventually re-released the film on digital and maybe in the theaters for like 5 minutes or a day or whatever, but there's a version that was like, everybody's like, well, how come we like Rogue, where's Anna Paquin? And she was barely in this film. She had one scene, and she needed to be in more of it, people thought. So there is a version that has more Rogue in it, called the Rogue Cut. So that makes sense. Other than that, we got just everybody. No, like, everybody shows up. Even when you think that the movie is over and not everybody is going to show up. I'm pretty sure everybody almost shows up. A Nightcrawler's not in it. No, there's no Nightcrawler, but there's a teleporter that X-Men fans from the comics will appreciate seeing. Let's see. Oh, of course, Jennifer Lawrence is wonderful as always as Mystique, getting less and less time in the blue bodysuit, walking around pretty much naked most of the time as she had done in the earlier films, as Rebecca Romaine had done. So they, as Jennifer's Lawrence's star was rising, she could get a little bit more sway in saying, you know what, I really don't feel like walking around naked and painted blue as much. So she does a lot of transforming in this. She is definitely blue in a number of scenes, but not nearly as much. And I think even less as the films go on, you'll see. Of course, Halle Berry shows up. Nicholas Hoult as Beast, Hank. Elliot Page, at this point still Ellen Page, is Kitty. Peter Dinklage plays Bolivar Trask, the bad guy in this film, although there's a few that you might recognize in this. Shawn Ashmore's Bobby. Evan Peters. Probably one of the best, most fun scenes in all of the X-Men films is in this movie. And you know what I'm talking about if you've seen the film. Starring Evan Peters as Quicksilver, the supposed son of Magneto that they don't fully acknowledge, but they hint at. In the comics, originally Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch were Magneto's children, but that's been changed in the comics since. This is still established in the films, at least just hinting. They couldn't really do it as much because the X-Men stuff is very separate from the proper Marvel stuff at the time. And that's why there was two Quicksilvers for a time, the one that was in the Avengers Age of Ultron and the one that's in this one. But in this one, Evan Peters just has all the charisma in the world. He plays Jeffrey Dahmer in a new movie right now, and I think on Hulu. I'm not sure, or Netflix. Netflix, I think. Yeah, Netflix. But it's the '70s. He's charming. He's he runs at high speed. So in order to film that, they do this wonderful sequence where they just slow everything down, pop on a pop song from that era, and just have him messing with everybody at in slow motion. And it's a beautifully shot scene. If you watch the movie for no other reason, watch it for the Pentagon break-in and the kitchen scene. So I don't know what point it is in the film, but it's maybe probably at least a half an hour in. It's worth checking out. It's just absolutely fun. So yeah, I could go on for days about the X-Men in general. I could probably start a whole new video series or just podcast about the X-Men in general, just blathering forever. I love these films. I love Hugh Jackman and Jennifer Lawrence and everybody else. And it's just, for me, this was a dream come true, just to see the two eras of the original classic cast and the first class prequel cast coming together in such a fun, unique way. I mean, honestly, I love the X-Men so much. When I lived, somebody else has this by now. I sold it online already. But when I lived in Virginia, uh, not far from the Pentagon, but decently a distance away. I had a license plate that said X-Men 2000 on it, and it had a Lockheed jet SR-71 on it, which is, if you know the comics, was the plane that they flew in there. Virginia offered that. So yeah, I was a bit of a nerd when it comes to the X-Men. So yeah, you got any questions about X-Men? I could talk your ear off about that. But yeah, this is great. This is one of the first ones we've gotten to look at out of all of the X-Men films that are now on Disney Plus. I think this is the first quarter that I've gotten a chance to watch, or at least have them randomly selected for me. What the heck? Oh no. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing more of these, revisiting most of them anyway. Some of them. Yeah. By the way, there's an F-bomb in this. Professor X, James McAvoy, drops one of the very few F-bombs on Disney Plus in a PG-13 film. They're allowed one in a PG-13 film, as long as it's not inherently sexual in its expression. You could just use it as profanity. But yeah, they changed it for Adventures in Babysitting. I haven't checked if they changed it back or not, but in this case, yeah, first F-bomb. I know there's a billion other things I could talk about, but yeah, I highly recommend this if you want to get caught up in just every single Marvel thing, because yes, while this is 20th Century Fox and it's not part of the MCU proper, it still counts, just like all the old Spider-Man films, and with Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield, that set a precedence now that lets everything still be connected in a multiverse, and that's pretty freaking great. So, yeah, I think I went through all the names. There's, by the way, yeah, don't start with this film, just so you know. If you're going to watch X-Men films, you're going to want to watch all the way back at the beginning, the first X-Men 1, 2, and 3, then First Class, then this one, then Apocalypse, and then Dark Phoenix. In that order, you're going to have to do that. It's because there's a ton of references in this, especially if you marathon them back to back. You'll appreciate it more if you do it in order. So anyway, enough of that. Let's pick tomorrow's episode.
164.
164. She takes a breath there. It takes a while, it seems. 164. Okay. Well, we got a reality show thing. In the red, when the red colored ones are documentaries or reality shows. This looks like it's a reality show. We'll probably just watch. I think it's a series, so I'll probably just watch one episode now. That'll do it for me. Because I think the point of this is pretty clear. We're going to be watching First Class Chefs Family Style. Wouldn't it have been weird if we had X-Men First Class and then First Class chefs? Yeah, super weird. Anyway, First Class Chefs, family style, on the next Disney Plus Everyday Challenge. I'll see you back here tomorrow with that. Bye.